as Gabriel mentioned, I've been working in the soft tech startup world in the past 6 or 7 years, and I've noticed that software engineers coming out of school need a little bit more experience, and that got me back into UofT and started teaching Introduction to Software Engineering course, which is a third-year course, and we'll talk about that. And it evolved into something that we're hoping that will benefit both the students and nonprofits and social ventures that Adam and I are going to talk about. With that, I'll pass it over to Adam to introduce himself.
Yeah, so I've been David's partner in crime since he joined the course, actually, and I think we started the program a couple of years. My background is sort of similar, lots of sort of software engineering experience in different domains. Similar to David, we saw an opportunity to kind of address a couple of needs as well as challenges that exist both in education, the nonprofit sector, and the private industry sector. So with that, I'll hand it off to David to talk about why we're here today.
So just so everyone knows, I want to introduce what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a third-year partnership program that we've introduced for a third-year course, come to science course at the University of Toronto. And the students come to take the course mostly to get ready for the professional life as a software engineer. And initially, the way it was working was that the students will introduce their own project, and they would come up with any idea that they had, and they would spend the whole term working on it. At the end, they would just deliver it, and no one would use it. So we saw it as a potential, an opportunity for us to kind of say, introducing nonprofits, social ventures, research institutes, and community groups, which Adam's going to introduce shortly, to bring them in to introduce a problem they're dealing with. And many of them don't have the resources, technical resources to actually deal with them. So Adam and I, as a teaching team for the course, and many other instructors and TAs or teaching assistants, came together to introduce community partners to the students and put together this program. The idea was that the students will build an MVP, a minimum viable product, which in the startup world essentially means something that they can take to their users and customers to say, hey, we've built this thing, try it out, see if it works or not. And we use our own technical skills and also our own experience managing software engineering teams to kind of bring that whole problem and build solutions for that. In the past 3 years, we've engaged thousands of software engineering hours, and just over 1,000 students who have taken part into the partnership program. We've worked with tens of partners, and we're going to talk about some of them. And the benefit for the most part, which we're going to talk about again, is the students work on real problems, something that they lack at the university level. And the partners get something that they can leverage and use for essentially solving their own problems that they don't have the resources for, right? So we're bringing these two together as part of this community partnership program. So how it works is, if you don't know, many of you may have been out of school for a long time. University term starts in the fall. Well, one of the terms starts in the fall. We're targeting for the fall term in this presentation, and we're requesting proposals from partners, and we're going to talk about some examples. And we requested proposals to be submitted by the 4th, which we're going to extend to the 11th to give people time to actually do something about it. We're going to share about how you can do the work and how we can go through the proposal process. We collect all those proposals, we review them, we make sure they're a good match for the program. Then we share them with the students, and we want the students to work on the projects that they were interested in. So we've had projects related to challenging problems around homelessness or equality or food distribution, poverty, different aspects of it. And every student finds something that is close to their heart in one of those projects. I want to make sure that the students are, one, interested in the project they want to work on, and two, have the skills. They apply for the projects that they're interested in, and then we match them with a partner. When everything is matched, we introduce them together, say, hey, partner and student team, be introduced, and here's kind of like the first few questions that you need to answer. Come up with kind of a mutual understanding of what's going to happen in the next term, and that's usually towards the end of September for the fall term, all the way through December. And they're going to be working together, building solutions together. In this process, there has been many times where the partners realize they've understood the problem differently. They want to change their mind. They have a better understanding of the whole problem. And it becomes an evolutionary process, an agile process that we build things together. And at the end, in the early December, they take the project, the software, and take it to their users, investors, or anywhere else that they wanted to kind of apply it. And we've had partners who actually deployed it to use them in production.
Yeah, and I'll sort of jump in here. Just so everyone is aware, that QR code you're seeing on the bottom of the screen is actually a link to the RFP. So if at any point you feel like tuning out and you just want to read, dense pages of what this process is and why it exists, you're welcome to check that out. We'll share the link at the end as well. Sort of following from what David's saying, while this is a great program to sort of have interested partners in the nonprofit sector, research sector, community individuals or early stage social ventures, try to build a project with students, there are a couple of maybe gotchas you might want to be aware of. So when it comes to intellectual property, for example, we are pretty strict in that regard because of the university's rules and regulations around student IP. So the way we try to navigate that is ask the partners to be okay with an open source license against that. Open source licenses are described to some extent in the RFP, so we won't get into that. If for any reason you do need something more than that, some sort of confidentiality agreement, that is something we can discuss, but we cannot do anything close to an NDA. So if you are trying to build something and it's staked on the intellectual property, you might want to have a conversation with us. Typically, there are no costs to working on this program, but depending on the idea you're trying to get past, the students will present to you sort of a set of solutions that may or may not incur a cost. We've worked with partners who have had a budget of $0 and they managed to get something going. And we've worked with partners who have maybe a smaller budget, something to dedicate to hosted service, whatever it might be. So something to kind of think about. And the costs go beyond that, right? So the students might deploy and build something for you by the end of the semester, but once it's done, the semester's over, whatever is built is yours to manage and maintain. So something to keep in mind if you're thinking about the longevity of a project. Beyond that, we also have kind of a fairly large document talking about our expectations of partners. We'll also talk about that at the end. But we are looking for partners who are willing to be engaged, really just a few hours a week, having meetings with students, responding to emails in a timely manner, only because our course goes on for the course of 4 months, regardless of whether or not you're in it, and students will have to inevitably take decisions if you're not present. It also makes for a better experience when the students have a partner they can rely on when it comes to sort of product development and so on and so forth. Some of the projects, I won't get to all of them, but maybe some notable examples. Well, we've got some bigger ones, we've got some smaller ones. So maybe on the bigger end, we've got Sick Kids Hospital. We worked with them a couple of times on a Euroflow app, which essentially measures the flow of urine for children who might be suffering from certain health conditions. It's specifically designed for families in remote areas to be able to kind of get an early diagnostic for their children without having to send them or sort of incur the costs of coming all the way to Toronto and go to the hospital. So that's been something that's been interesting. Vector Institute, I believe they worked with the School of Medicine at the university to build like an emergency room workflow simulator. So to allow their researchers to test new ways they could orient their emergency room without having to actually put that into practice. Harvard Medical School built a tool around medical students who take notes on patients. It's a very pen and paper process, but we've been able to digitize it for them, sort of allow for better quality control and kind of a better understanding of the growth of their students as they're doing that. Smaller ones that have been really kind of interesting underdogs, Feeding Canadian Kids, they had this process where they matched restaurants with after-school programs and delivery drivers to be able to address food insecurity within Canada amongst children. They had this very long manual process they were able to sort of reflect in technology, and they've actually been with us, I think, twice now as partners to build that. The Law Design Collab built a Ontario lease wizard with us. Some of the other interesting ones, Stopgap. For those of you who aren't familiar, Stopgap is a nonprofit in Toronto and I believe Canada that works on building these ramps that create for more accessible pathways into businesses in Toronto where there's a bit of a gap and where city laws don't otherwise allow a permanent ramp. Again, very manual process to kind of get requests from businesses for that. We were able to automate that for them. The Ontario Association for the Deaf actually built an app that allowed for a much easier engagement between first responders and authorities and folks who have hearing impairments. An interaction that would normally take about 40 minutes was now reduced to 5 or 10, and so on and so forth. So these are partners that go from like a one-person team to an entire organization, and they've all had relatively successful projects come out of it. So we do work with nonprofits, we work with early stage startups, we work with community individuals and folks that just have interesting ideas. So for those who are maybe educators in the room or who are simply interested in kind of how this program has worked, we've obviously had lots of difficult challenges and barriers that we've been able to overcome. And some of the key takeaways we've understood over the last 2.5 years have been the following. So to get something like this to work, you have to have clear expectations between partners and students. So one way we tackle that is a series of sort of introductory meetings, but also a long kind of community guideline document that really explains to everyone involved what it is we expect in terms of interaction, time commitment, but also what we expect in terms of what you're going to get out of it and what you should be okay with. Part of this program that's pretty important is experiential capacity building. So myself, David, and the TAs, a lot of us have diverse skills in software engineering, product management, and leadership. And so we use that to try to bridge the gap and build capacity on both sides. And this is why we've had, smaller partners who have zero IT experience actually come out with interesting and useful MVPs. And we've even had partners who have excellent IT experience not come out on top in the same way. And so we find building that capacity sort of in a real world way makes sense. So we don't necessarily do training sessions, but rather our TAs and instructors get involved on the ground early on and provide mentorship to the students on understanding how to work with their partners. But we also talk to the partners in terms of understanding how you work with what are very highly technical students who might not have the same real world experience and engagement with stakeholders. That brings us to knowledge translation. That's probably the most important piece. So those early meetings where the students are trying to understand the organization, their goals, their mandate, and the problem they're having, the organizations who are trying to understand what it is these students are pitching on a technical level, we stand in the middle of that and sort of provide mediation and knowledge translation on both ends and try to kind of give everyone an understanding of the language everyone's using. And after the first few meetings, people tend to get a hang of it. And there tends to be some students who are champions in that process. With regards to the partners, if they do require additional support beyond those initial meetings, we're there to support, whether it's interventions through emails or actually joining meetings and so on and so forth. I think one of the key things that allows this to work in terms of kind of student engagement and actually getting a project off the ground is the alignment of goals, motivations, and incentives. So for students, it's great that they're able to work on something that David said is close to their heart, but it's also great for them to be able to build something that they can use on their portfolio that has a real world context, that has some risk or some impact associated to it. We find that the teams that succeed more often are the ones who have a greater level of interest and less so the ones who maybe match the skill sets of the project needed. When we're talking about incentives, really it's that ability to work on something real world, but it's also to form a new network or connection. A lot of our partners being nonprofits are able to open up volunteer opportunities, some of them being early stage ventures, want the same technical individuals who have built this to come on board with them and so on and so forth. Also for us, we obviously build our curriculum to incentivize, good work, good communication, and good teamwork with our partners. Beyond that, being flexible and being able to adapt, coming in with an open mind is really helpful because it allows, both folks to come out with a meaningful project. Like David said early on, partners come in with a particular idea, and mediation between students and ourselves allows us to really expand the horizons, but also kind of narrow down the scope of what's being done. And then that last important bit, which we're working on now, in addition to what we already have, is that expertise in product and program management. So we tend to hire TAs and look for instructors who have considerable software engineering experience. But David is about to introduce a new component this year, which is looking for mentors who can support our students in some of the more intricate technical aspects where they might want to do something innovative that we don't quite have the capacity for. So those are, very, very brief introduction. This has been the stuff of conversation and nightmares for David and I over many, many hours. So if you're interested in learning more about this, definitely ping us after the fact and we can have some conversations on that. I'll pass it on to David to talk about the impact.
So with that, like I said, thanks, Adam. We've been running this for the past 3 years. Initially, we started as a pilot, and it has grown more and more. Initially, it was just a few teams, which meant 20 to 30 students, and we learned lessons from there. And now more than 90% of the students opt for this partnership program, and we have every term about 60 proposals that come in for us. So in the fall, we're expecting about 40 to 60 as well, of which we can select 30 to 40 of them to work with the students. And over the years, we've had hundreds of partners participate in the program, at least write proposals. Some partners come back and participate multiple times. Feeding Canadian Kids, My Oral Village is another great financial literacy social venture that benefited from the program as well. And we're making sure that the students get something valuable so they can, as Adam mentioned, put their own portfolio, talk about it in their interviews, be proud, and have that experience that many of the students lack these days right when they're graduating, right? Um, the network is formed with the students working together as teams, with partners coming in, with proposals being put together, and repeated students working on different projects. So overall, it adds kind of like a dynamic, and the software that students have built are being used in production. And when I say in production, that means like users, actual users, are using it to deliver food and get food and learn about financial literacy and improve different projects and different missions. And that's the biggest thing that we see value in. And we've had many partners come back, and I've had great feedback from the partners many times, rating it 10 out of 10, writing great testimonials, coming back again, which is to me is the most valuable kind of feedback, saying that I found it valuable, I learned from it, and I want to use it again as part of the program. So these are the big things that we've seen. I don't want to name any specific partners, but we've seen some great that makes me proud in terms of having just opened the floor and made it possible for the students and the partners to kind of make this mutually beneficial relationship. And lastly, I want to talk about our call, which is essentially we're asking for two things, not essentially inviting for two kinds of stakeholders, if you will. One, for project partners, the individuals, startup founders, social venture kind of again activists or people who are working on those initiatives, or nonprofits, charities, any of those kind of organizations that may have a software project, to go through the link and apply, read through the documentation, apply through the link. Adam can share that in the chat as well. On the other side, for the first time, we're introducing the technical mentors because we don't have the capacity to be a technical leader for 200 students with the number of TAs that we have and manage 30 projects on the technical level. So I'm hoping to get a few software engineers who are professionals in industry to jump in to help students, to mentor the students. Obviously, will benefit them from helping them with their technical leadership skills, with their management and leadership skills. And of course, it will benefit the partners because at the end, they will get a better product and the students will learn from them. And hopefully, if the team works well together, the students may join the technical mentors kind of team in the industry that they're at and join their team and be hired there as well. So again, thinking about all kinds of wins for every partner and stakeholder involved. If you have any questions about the mentorship or the partnership program, Adam and I are happy to kind of answer your questions. And with that, I think we'll open the floor for questions. Thank you so much for your attention, for being here, and hope it was helpful, and we're happy to take your questions.
All right, thank you so much, guys. All right, yes, we have accumulated quite a few questions throughout the presentation. Looking for the first one. Okay, Richard asks, how are the students graded on their project and who grades them?
I can tackle that one. So the TAs, so the way it works is we separate the TAs. So the TA who is sort of mentoring and leading the students in tutorial and sort of shepherding them through the projects and communicating with the partner is not the marking TA, just to sort of remove any conflict of interest. It's typically one of the other associate TAs marking it. In terms of how they're graded, the program has 4 deliverables, which are really just kind of project submissions. The first deliverable is kind of a document that asks 10 questions, a few of them related to the problem scope, the types of users, and kind of the technical approach. And the rest of it is really just a lot about the process. So by the end of September, the students and the partner will have or the students mainly will have produced a document that is their reinterpretation of the problem and the intended solution and scope, but it also lays out kind of the rules of engagement as to exactly how they're going to communicate, what there is to expect, the process, and so on and so forth. And that kind of gives students and partners the freedom to choose their own process. It is a, half qualitative, half quantitative marking scheme. And then going forward from there, it's really just marking the first, second, and third deployments of the product. So we'll mark them on their progress early on, just making sure they've prioritized features that truly address the problem they're trying to solve. And then kind of near the end, we'll mark them on not only their MVP, but their ability to hand off the project in kind of a sort of fluid and successful manner. And so in that regard, they're sort of learning those skills that are important in industry, but also we're kind of making sure that the partners aren't just left behind at the end of the semester because the students couldn't hand something off in that regard. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yep, as a follow-up, Richard also asks if any of the partners have any input on the grades.
Definitely not. So we're very protective of our students and kind of our responsibility as educators, both to them and to the academic institution. That being said, we try to strike a very careful balance on creating assignments and work that challenge them in terms of their ability to apply the curriculum. So that's software engineering, but in a way that is applied in a real world context, and that's where it sort of benefits the partners. We do have a very, I'm going to say, kind of empathetic and real world culture in our program, in that we're not very particular on the deadlines. We're willing to give students, extra time. We almost treat them like software engineers working on our team. We recognize things come up that might impact their work, and we try to incentivize just active communication with their partners and really clear lines of communication and clearly set expectations. A lot of that comes out with the first deliverable. So if by then there's a sense on either end that this isn't going to work out for whatever reason, both parties have a chance to back out, and that's totally fine. We do have ways of ensuring the students have a smooth semester without our partner, but obviously we try to prevent that through kind of a more careful matching process.
Awesome. Okay, our next question comes from Pat Kahn. He has two questions. The first one being, what's the program's rationale behind enforcing the FOSS-MIT license? And it's a neat idea, just curious about motivations.
David, you want to take that one?
Sure. So it's a combination of practicality and rules of the university. I'm going to start with the rules because that's something that we cannot bend. And it is that the students working for a course credit will own the IP that they generate, which means in this case, the software and the code that they write, right? So that's something that we have to honor. Now, on the other hand, we've had partners, especially early stage startups, who want to be able to take that code and essentially do whatever they want with it, right? So the kind of middle ground that we found with this is that an MIT license enabled the students to kind of hold the IP for their work, but also give it out to the world to do whatever they want with it. Now, Adam talked about IP, and a lot of times, or sometimes, partners want to have essentially exclusive right to the code, and that's something that they ask the student to kind of not share the work that they have created with others and on GitHub and all the public spaces that might be, right? So that way, students still own the code, they've given it to the partner can do whatever they want with it. And lastly, and probably the most important thing is MIT license protects the students from any kind of legal action or anything that comes up happen later, right? So if for any reason there's a bug, there's an issue, there's security or privacy, anything that's going on, students can't be on the hook for a volunteer role that they've done as an initial version of the product, right? So an MIT license essentially enables all of these things to be met, and we've had partners and everybody kind of work very well in this kind of model.
Great, thank you. Okay, so his second question was, have you ever had government partners run projects? And if so, how does that work? And if not, thoughts on why that is?
I don't recall any government partners. I think the closest we've come is academic researchers or public institutions with public funding. No real opinions on my end as to why we haven't had government partners. I mean, we do try to distribute this program widely through the CSI, Civic Tech, our own networks. Maybe, again, another sort of close one is educators within various school boards at various levels have also approached us, but no sort of official ministry. But David, you might have a better sort of view on some of the partners who maybe applied and weren't successful, and I just didn't notice that.
No, I don't think we've had like anything like ministry level, of course. I would think if the project is important enough, again, I don't know, I'm not in the government. I'm the farthest from the government being in the startup world. I think if a project becomes of value and importance, they probably would allocate resources for it. And we've had individuals and smaller sub-teams who take it on themselves to do an initiative and run an initiative who come in. But again, they don't, I can't think of like anyone who signed up as a ministry of X or Y to join in the program. Having said that, I teach another course in data that works with data, and I've worked with government bodies that kind of helped with sharing that data and kind of owning that data and working with us, but not in this course as part of as a partner in the program.
Thanks both.
All right, our next question comes from Brent, who asks, who and how do you apply for the program, and what is the criteria?
David, you want to take that one?
I think Adam can share a document that covers it all. We get a lot of questions about it. We don't have any specific kind of requirement to say you must be of this side or this legal status or any of those things. Essentially, our criteria is, do you have a unique problem that software would solve? And that's what we assess you on, and that's what we look at. So a lot of times people come in asking us to build a website. A lot of people come in to ask us to build a community, or like a volunteer management or some kind of a standard functionality, customer relationship management, something that you can buy off the shelf and subscribe as a software from with like $10 a month or something like that. And those do not qualify, not because we don't want to work on them, but mostly because we want to make sure the program is valuable for the partners as well. And we think they're better off going with a standard off-the-shelf program with a community and support around it, as opposed to working with our students to build something that already exists. So I know it doesn't quite answer the question. I'm happy to kind of hear your idea and what you have in mind, because again, the most important thing is having some kind of a unique problem that software can solve.
And maybe kind of conversely to that, and not to skip the queue, but the corollary question, do you track acceptance as part of impact? Definitely, we track everything, part of our sales sheets of responses and who we've accepted and who's been matched. I don't know if we have any aggregate numbers on that. I will say, if there are 60 partners applying, I think in the past we've maybe disqualified 2 or 3 kind of on this notion that it's very clear. It's sort of a structured for-profit business that has maybe a particular feature they want built and just want free labor, with no intention of allowing the students to kind of have any creative freedom or any sort of bilateral process there. Beyond that, I would actually say we take a very collaborative approach to the RFP. Like, we will look at people's applications in advance. We'll tell them sort of, we think you should maybe take this approach or maybe modify your application in that regard. Or, as David said, if we think there's something off the shelf that works, that better suits their needs, we'll let them know it's best not to reinvent the wheel. Here's a few resources you can look at, and maybe don't spend time putting together an application. So almost like well over 90% of people get accepted. It's just a function of how many student teams we have that impacts how many actually end up with the team working with them.
So I think it's worthwhile to make a distinction between accepted, meaning that the criteria matches what we're looking for, and matched, which means a student team put their hand up and said, I want to work on this project. So 90+% get accepted to the program, and we've had 30 to 50% be matched to be worked on by the student team.
And sorry to interrupt, with the follow-up. That's a good question in terms of acceptance into organizations. David, I don't know if you probably have the numbers on this. It's definitely on a case-by-case basis, and it sort of depends on the intentions of the partners. Some actually put the system into active use and have told us that sort of weeks after the program ends. Some are quite happy with the MVP as a proof of concept to be able to generate funding. For some, it's kind of the opposite. They've got an MVP that really demonstrated this. It's actually not the direction the organization wants to take. How many continue to use the software and maintain it well after the fact? It's not something I think I'm privy to. David, I don't know if you've heard anything in that regard from past partners.
So we don't have a kind of aggregate numbers that I can share, but that's definitely a great idea. I can look through that. The program is very young, 3 years young, and we don't have that long of a kind of history to work with. But what I can do is follow up with some of our partners to get some of those data. That, again, that's valuable information for us. Thanks for asking that question. But I can think of a few partners who partners with us, let's say winter of 2018, came back last year, 2 years later, to continue working on the project, which means they're still actively working on it, right? So these are just the examples that are in my mind right now, and not necessarily everybody, and I can't say like 80% did that, but that's definitely a great question that we can gather data and just for our own benefit. And if you ever come back, or if you ever share this opportunity in a different place, I'm happy to report on those numbers as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question is from Skydra. She says, a curveball question. Product management is becoming increasingly popular in government. She loves your point about passion being more important than specific skill sets. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more, bearing in mind that government seems to shift to recruit more product thinking experts?
Yeah, I can take the first pass at that. So I think it starts for us in terms of when we align students with regards to passion. We actually ask them, what are your motivations and interests in this project? And we are looking for students that have clearly understood the mandate and the mission of the organization.